Okay, let's dive right in. In Hindu cosmology, there's this really common belief that the Kali Yuga, that's the current age of darkness, is an absolutely massive 432,000 years long. But what if that number, that whole idea, was actually based on a huge misunderstanding? The source material we're digging into today puts that giant number to the test. It makes a pretty compelling case that the real story is something totally different, and maybe a lot more relevant to us right now than we think. So to kick things off, the source asks us to just look around. I mean, does the world we live in really feel like it's at the start of a long, slow decline? The argument here is that all the chaos we see feels more like we're reaching an end point, not a beginning. I mean, we see descriptions of constant conflict, of pandemics, of violence. The source points to what it calls a total collapse of trust in society, where even the closest relationships, like family, are just falling apart. This whole idea is captured perfectly in a famous old saying. It paints a picture of a world that's completely upside down, a place where the deserving and worthy are left struggling, while the unworthy get all the rewards. And that leads to this really critical question that the source poses. If things are already this chaotic, if evil is supposedly at its peak, does it make any sense at all that we're only at the starting line of a 432,000-year marathon of misery? It just doesn't feel right. Okay, so from there, the argument shifts away from just observation and starts looking at the hard numbers. And this is where it points out some major inconsistencies between different timelines. And check this out. This table lays out the conflict perfectly. You've got science and even software analysis dating things like the Ramayana and Mahabharata to just the last few thousand years. But then you look at the traditional timeline for the yugas, and it's talking about millions of years. That's not just a small difference, that's a massive disconnect. And this right here, this is what the source says is the core logical problem. On the left, you've got the previous era, the Dvapara Yuga. It was a better, more virtuous time, and it supposedly lasted about 2,000 years. Now compare that to the Kali Yuga on the right, an age of peak immorality that's meant to be 432,000 years long. You gotta ask, why would the better age be so short, while this dark age drags on for nearly 500,000 years? The logic just doesn't seem to add up. So where on earth did this giant number even come from? Well, the source argues it's not a divine number, but a human error, a failure to think critically and logically about these sacred texts. The source uses a pretty strong term for this. It calls it mental slavery, the act of just accepting information without questioning it, usually because you're told it's a matter of faith. And the argument is, this way of thinking actually stops you from finding the real truth. And according to this viewpoint, a real teacher wouldn't just shut you down and tell you to believe. They would actually encourage you to ask tough questions. They'd want you to use logic and science to figure things out for yourself. All right, now we get to the heart of it. Let's see how all of this questioning leads to a completely different answer, a dramatic recalculation of this whole cosmic clock. Okay, so if the old timeline is shaky, then what's the real one? What is the actual calculation for the length of the Kali Yuga according to this source? And here it is. This is the big reveal. The key insight is that the number, 432,000, isn't actually wrong. It's the unit of time that got misinterpreted. It was never meant to be 432,000 years. It was meant to be 432,000 days. And here's how that math breaks down. It's actually pretty straightforward. The source proposes that the real length of the Kali Yuga is 1,200 years. Now, back in ancient times, many calendars used a 360-day year. So what happens when you multiply 1,200 years by 360 days? You get exactly 432,000 days. It all clicks into place. And that brings us to the final, really revolutionary answer from the source. The Kali Yuga isn't this unimaginably long age of almost 500,000 years. Instead, it's a much more understandable cycle of just 1,200 years. And that shift is huge. It means these cosmic ages have a much faster rhythm, and we're not just passive observers in a slow decline, but active players in a cycle we can actually see and feel. So let's just quickly retrace our steps. We started with this mind-bogglingly huge number. Then, we looked at arguments that it just doesn't line up with the world today or with other timelines. And all of that led us to a brand new calculation, all based on one simple but profound idea. Someone confused days with years. Now, of course, this explainer is based on one particular interpretation from our source material. But it leaves you with a really provocative thought, doesn't it? If a core belief about time itself can be changed and potentially changed so dramatically, what other fundamental ideas that we take for granted might also be based on a simple misunderstanding?